Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, the entire media sphere is just in a tizzy right now over the fact that Chief White House Counsel Stephen Bannon has been ousted from his lofty perch. Now, we all know that Steve Bannon is one of those most divisive figures of the entire Trump camp. He came in the latter part of the disastrous debacle and fiasco known as the 2016 presidential election cycle, and had already gained infamy for himself by claiming that he had transformed the Breitbart news media outlet into a platform for the alt-right. We know this was one of the areas where Milo Yiannopoulos had attempted to coin a new version of the definition of that term that originally came from Richard Spencer. All of this was something that had bubbled up during that most heated and contentious electoral cycle of all living memory. It speaks volumes about what is going on within the conservative movement. And one of the things that my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and indeed our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, as well as yours truly, attempted to warn you throughout the course of the past approximate 2 years, is the danger that this faction posed for the conservative movement. Because when you stop and think about it, with a modicum of objectivity, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies in the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media will have a field day of creating a perception that all conservatives fall into this broad category. And one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that in the arena of American politics, irrespective of whether the perception that is being peddled by the puppet masters of the dissemination of information matters more than reality itself. Oftentimes, more than not, it matters more than reality itself. And again, this is just one of those things that cannot be escaped. So the alt-right was something that the left latched onto, and I think they turned it into a bigger boogeyman than it actually is. But that being said, this is their modus operandi. We did not go into the 2016 election cycle without the knowledge that the media would be directly against the conservative movement, would be diametrically opposed to all that we stand for. That is just par for the course. That is what they do. That's their initiative, their agenda, and they will never depart from that come hell or high water. That is just their well-established pattern of behavior. But it truly does speak volumes about the volatile state of the American system of polity in these fast-paced modern times in which we live today. It shows that we are completely polarized. And I believe that the demonstration that occurred in Charlottesville, Virginia last week is a prime example of just how divided the American people are. And of course, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are going to do everything within their power to utilize this as a weapon to bludgeon conservatives. This is again because they cannot compete in the free marketplace of ideas. They never have been able to do that. They don't have a desire to do it because they know that they can't do it, as their ideology is essentially theft by any other name. And so they will try the rigmarole, they will try the platitudes and the obfuscation of the truth, as they do each and every time, to try and establish a narrative that is based on a faulty perception. And yes, a faulty perception can be known as a lie. If you step back and think about it for a moment, ladies and gentlemen, the reason that politicians get such a bad rap is that they go by perception. And the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media for well over a half century now, in fact, even greater than a century, because, as you know, from that long ago solo flight special I did with respect to the rise of the mainstream media with William Randolph Hearst and his newspaper conglomerates, they have been attempting to control public sentiment via yellow journalism and sensationalism. That's just par for the course for what they do. It is what motivates them. It is what they think is right, and they will never back away from that. They have no desire to step away from that. It is their driving desire from every waking moment to try and pit American citizen against American citizen by utilizing the tried and true, albeit threadbare, tactic and strategy of divide and conquer. After all, that's exactly what the author of the Fabian Socialist Bible, Rules for Radicals, and, of course, that author being Saul Alinsky, was all about. It was about engendering a sense of hostility, a sense of rampant radicalism projected onto their political foes as a way to shut down all discourse. And this is part of the reason why Jeremy and I have so oft times on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, decried the fact that we no longer seem capable of engaging in civil discourse in this country. And when you no longer have the ability to discuss things with a level head, detached and divorced from your emotions, you begin to see the sort of violence that spirals out of control that we saw in Charlottesville, Virginia. And this was all by design. Folks, I'm not one to go into conspiracy theories, but the great weight of the evidence seems to indicate that there is an organized, a force behind this that organizes it, has planned it, has developed this plan, and has been stalwart and steadfast in sticking to this plan. Now, we can make no bones about the fact that this plan certainly does not bode well for the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours, we the people. No, it's designed to strip and belittle us, to strip and deprive us and abridge and usurp our fundamental and inalienable rights, which happen to be endowed to us by our Creator, who is none other than the God of nature himself. These godless forces, these forces that attempt to deny the existence of an overarching natural law, are acting in a way that is diametrically opposed to the foundational image that our founding fathers had conjured up at the inception of this nation some 237 plus years ago. Again, these are things we can ill afford to ignore. Yet with all of the obfuscation that's out there, all of the subterfuge that's being thrown out by those nefarious forces who are the agent provocateurs of tyranny, despotism, but above all oppression, it makes it exceedingly difficult for us to find the truth. And the chaos that is gripping the 45th presidential administration of these United States of America falls squarely into the hands of those spin doctors for the rabid and radical left. They see this as an opportunity to completely discredit conservatism. They see this as an opportunity to once again double down on these fallacious and specious lines that they've come up with, that all conservatives are racist, all those who oppose them only oppose them because they're either bigots of one form or another. Think back to that ridiculous claim of the so-called GOP war on women. Again, They are playing fast and loose with terms, dabbling in that dark and twisted game of semantics that we've been warning you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, about, dating back to our premiere episode, which aired on September 11th of 2015. And their game plan certainly has not changed since that time. They are still engaging in that sort of madness, that sort of lunacy, and of course it's not going to change within the foreseeable future. It is not going to improve within the foreseeable future because, as I have said, almost to the point of it reaching ad nauseum, the frothing of the mouth Fabian socialist leftists believe they see a light at the end of the tunnel and that means that their victory is within grasp. But what is so disheartening about it all is that the conservatives find their ideology under assault from all sides. And the narrative is being spun in such a way as the conservatives will be blamed for this. And one of the things that I've noticed since the ouster of Stephen Bannon, who has promptly returned to his position as the head of Breitbart Media, is that a lot of quote-unquote conservatives are out there saying that now the Trump White House and cabinet has more Democrats than Republicans. They've shooed out or hushed out any conservative voices. But what Steve Deace pointed out, and I think quite appropriately at that, was that if Steve Bannon is your voice of conservatism, when the alt-right says that it has to be an alternative form of conservatism, which means it's not conservative at all, then we've got a major problem. We have a major identity problem. And believe it or not, words do matter. Because again, in the arena of American politics, but particularly in this modern arena of American politics, perception oftentimes matters more than reality itself. That's the unfortunate truth that we, in our capacity as United States citizens, as advocates for the constitutional compositionist movement, are going to have to come to terms with. It could be, it could be easily said that we just have to keep fighting. But fighting is not cutting it. The fact of the matter is, when we look at the current state of affairs that is afflicting the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave, we can see beyond a shadow of the doubt that there is a lack of knowledge with respect to the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is known in the common American vernacular as the Supremacy Clause, is none other than our shared United States Constitution. That means that people also do not have a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. And as Jeremy and I and Nelson have stated so frequently on previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program, without those rights, we are truly left with nothing. That is something that we cannot escape. It is an inescapable, dare I say, self-evident truth. And the sooner that we wake up to this fact, the better we will be. The better able we will be to place this nation squarely and firmly back onto the path to prosperity. Because shouldn't that be the goal of anyone? You see, this is the thing. Both sides of the political spectrum are not operating with the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. They have their own ulterior motives. They have their own pet special projects. They have their own desires to expand the scope of government. Because if you recall, one of the champions of Trump's harebrained idea for a stimulus infrastructure spending package of $1 trillion to span over the period of a single decade was Steve Bannon. That's not conservative. Conservative is, again, one of those terms that is becoming belied and is becoming weakened or changed by the dark and twisted game of semantics that is engaged in by the left incessantly in this country. And it has, been taken away from the root and traditional definition of it, to conserve or to preserve, that is the root word of it. So again, we have to go back to the Constitution as it was originally composed. Because if we do that, then we can transcend traditional political labels. We can go back to a core element that is undeniably a strong, tried and true system of government, because again, if you recall, the Constitution is the longest standing legal document of its type throughout the entire course of human events. You see, that is something that should be embraced. That would allow the chains and shackles that have been an impediment to the American people to be removed once and for all. And you see, neither side of the political spectrum wishes to engage in that. Neither side of the political aisle wants to admit that that is the one surefire way to truly put the United States of America back on track to being a strong, robust, vibrant republic. But the other attribute of that has to go with those wise words of that sagacious founding father, Sam Adams, who stated that the only way that the United States can be such a strong, vibrant, and robust republic is for the people, the true sovereigns, to be a virtuous people. In other words, to live by a high standard of morality, decency, to be able to clearly differentiate and distinguish between that which is right and that which is wrong. But with the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism, and this sort of maddening tribalism that we've seen by both the left and the right, with that dark and twisted notion of identity politics that was played out on the theater of violence in Charlottesville, Virginia, we see that we've departed from being a virtuous people. Not the vast majority of American citizens, but it's as the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs warned in his magnum opus of Keynes at Harvard back in the 1950s and 60s, that your average American would be so inundated with these overzealous and draconian regulations put forth by a leviathan and out-of-control administrative state which is ultimately unaccountable to them, that they don't have the energy, they don't have the time, they don't have the wherewithal to stay on top of all of this and to keep abreast of all of these issues, and therefore the nation teeters closer to the brink of collapse as these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists continue to double down on their efforts to fundamentally, permanently, and irreparably transform these United States of America away from being a constitutionally endowed, federalist, representative republic into some sort of frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftist dystopia torn straight from the pages of an Orwellian nightmare. Now, folks, I'm not attempting to fearmonger here, and I'm not taking any satisfaction from watching the bread and circuses that has engulfed the upper echelons of our federal government in a conflagration of incompetence, because, again, as our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, has said, as my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, has said, as I have said on prior episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program, we don't want the president to fail. We never do. Because that means that we are then rooting for the failure of the nation as a whole. And again, we have to realize that when it comes to our nation, the whole is far greater than the mere sum of its parts. That's an inescapable, self-evident truth. And the sooner that we embrace that, And the sooner that we recognize that, the better able we'll be to truly begin to focus on those issues that are of the utmost importance to basically restoring American exceptionalism. And again, we do not have the wherewithal to ignore this. We do not have the political capital to ignore this. And if we do ignore this, it will be to our great detriment each and every time. Now, I fully realize that this is far easier said than done, but done it must be. And if there is any people on the face of God's green earth who are truly capable of overcoming these hurdles, obstacles, and adversities which have been erected in their path, it is the American people. We have done so much in our relatively brief yet illustrious history here on the face of God's green earth. But the only way we've done that is to have a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. I know I might sound like a broken record when I refer to that, but it speaks directly to what is necessary for us to be a viable political movement and force. And I don't mean force in a thug-like manner. Part of what we have to do is be the virtuous people that Sam Adams said that we had to be if we wanted and desired for our republic to be a strong, vibrant, and robust one. We've got to be virtuous. That means civil discourse. But it also means calling out those radical fringes on either side of the political aisle that are doing everything within their power to pit American citizen against American citizen in the hopes that we are so distracted by the subterfuge that they throw out that we can no longer see the big picture. And again, this draws me back to the farewell address of 1796 from the father of our nation, George Washington, in which he warned the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people, not to allow ourselves to break down into disparate and competing factions, because the moment that we do that, we get the sort of anarchy and chaos that was on full display at Charlottesville, Virginia. Again, this is something we can ill afford to allow to come to fruition in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave. And unfortunately, it is going to be all the more difficult, because with Bannon's ouster, I see even more fissures of division developing within the so-called conservative movement. I see that it's going to take focus even further away from the Constitution. Not that there was much focus on the Constitution, because there truly hasn't been. And it just means that the Fabian socialist leftists will now have a chance to try and ratchet up the pressure, as they always do, because they are incessant in their incremental attempts to push this nation ever further to the left. Again, this is just their modus operandi. This is just the way they have been operating throughout the past 150 plus years. They are giddy at this opportunity to further drive the wedge of division into the conservative movement. And again, it's because there has been a hijacking. There has been an attempt to uproot the movement, to discard the electoral planks of our platform, to turn our backs on some of our deepest held beliefs. And again, ladies and gentlemen, this is something we can ill afford to allow to come to fruition, because it means now more than ever we have enemies to our right, enemies to our left, and they are hell-bent on the complete and utter annihilation of these United States of America, both as a nation and people. And unfortunately, things are playing out as Jeremy and I predicted they would throughout the course of these past approximate 2 years. That there would be a push by the forces that wanted to create a tyranny of false unity to redefine conservatism, and then it would be a shift ever further to the left. And it's happening. It's happening. Look at the way that Rush Limbaugh has dropped any mention of being the Institute for Advanced Conservative Studies. He's now just a warrior against the left. But who's left? You see, the left is a transitory term. It really is situational. It's political relativism, which is just another offshoot of moral relativism or situational morality. These are things we cannot accept. These are things that are insufferable, and they will lead to a greater conflagration of issues, a bigger plethora and cornucopia of problems facing us both as a nation and people. And again, it's because we have no clear root or basis in an ideology, or a platform, or a philosophy, or a position. And again, how do we operate when we can't do that? When we have no idea of who we are? It's tantamount to the refusal to label Islamofascists for what they are. I mean, look at the attacks at Barcelona, and look at the way that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies and the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media again refused to try and tie it to all of that. Yet, at the same time, they try and impugn the right by saying that all of them are part of this alt-right mentality, when, of course, nothing could be further from the truth. But there can be no denying that these elements are out there, and that they are both dangerous, that they are both intellectually disingenuous, and that they have the same goal, which is to undermine America as we know her today and to replace her. With the alt-right, it's with some form of nationalism based on a form of tribalism, and with the left, it's based off of some sort of utopian socialist fantasy that is unachievable in this earthly mortal plane of reality that we live in. One of the things that Jeremy likes to say is that reality is an absolute, and he's right. It is. The natural law tenets are immutable. They are just as applicable today as they were at the inception of this nation some 237 plus years ago, as God willing they will be some 237 plus years from today. But the only way to achieve that, and to ensure its survival, is that we, in our capacity as United States citizens, stand up for the document that provides us the tools and the arsenal of liberty to defend our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. So it means that we have to stop looking for some sort of messianic figure to come down from providence above and give us his special political blessing, that he will wave a magic wand and somehow make things all better in the nation. That's just not going to happen. That is unrealistic. It is not going to be achievable. If you want to see a savior for the nation, mightn't I suggest that you take a look in the mirror? Because based on the way that our founding fathers developed and designed this republic since its inception, since the Philadelphia Convention, it has to be through us. We are the ones that do it. We are the ones who have the ability, the political capability, the wherewithal, and the authority as the owners of this nation, as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, to bring this nation back from the brink of ruin and to preserve the time-honored values, institutions, and traditions that we know and love in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave. And I know that, again, it's easier to say this than do it, but do it we must. And so education, Spreading knowledge with respect to the Constitution and to our values is what we have to focus on. Not so much fighting. We have to win hearts and minds, and we can do that. But it is going to require that we figure out a better way to communicate with people, that we find a way to articulately deliver our message and not just fall for the subterfuge that is spun by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. One of the things that we have to keep in mind with respect to Stephen Bannon, and indeed those who are acolytes of the alt-right, is the fact that they attempt to proclaim that they are nationalists. In the case of Richard Spencer and his type, they are just basically crudely rebadged white nationalists. But in the case of Stephen Bannon, he attempted to proclaim himself as an economic nationalist. Now, nationalism is focusing on a national identity as derived from a particular thing. In the United States, it's difficult to really claim a nation-state in that form of phraseology. And the reason I say that is that James Madison made it very clear in a speech that he delivered to the House of Representatives on June 8th of 1789. And it said basically that there are a great number of our constituents who are dissatisfied with it, meaning the Constitution, among whom are many respectable for their talents and patriotism, and respectable for their for the jealousy they have for their liberty, which, though mistaken in its object, is laudable in its motive. Look at that. Look at how beautiful the civil discourse was at that time. That's an art that we've lost sight of in this modern arena of American politics. He says, there is a great body of people falling under this description who at present feel much inclined to join their support to the cause of federalism if they were satisfied on this one point. We ought not to disregard their inclination, but on principles of amity and moderation, conform to their wishes, and expressly declare the great rights of mankind secured under this Constitution. Right there, it speaks to the fact that there was a unified goal at the Constitutional Convention, and at this point, where they were moving to basically usher in the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution. It says, further, the acquiescence which our fellow citizens show under the government calls upon us for a like return of moderation, but perhaps there is a stronger motive than this for our going into a consideration of the subject. It is to provide those securities for liberty which are required by a part of the community. I allude in a particular manner to those two states that have not sought to not thought fit, to throw themselves into the bosom of the Confederacy. It is a desirable thing, on our part as well as theirs, that a reunion should take place as soon as possible. I have no doubt if we proceed to take those steps which would be prudent and requisite at this juncture, that in a short time we would see that disposition prevailing in those states which have not come in, that we have seen prevailing in those states which have embraced the Constitution. So you see, already this was a form of persuasive speaking, a form of magnanimity that we don't see in the modern arena of American politics. It's this sort of thing that the Stephen Bannons and the George Soroses and these radical fringe elements who claim to be on the direct and polar opposite fringes of the political spectrum want to disregard. Now, Madison continued. He said, But I will candidly acknowledge that over and above all these considerations, I do conceive that the Constitution may be amended. That is to say, if all power is subject to abuse, that then it is possible the abuse of the powers of the general government may be guarded against in a more secure manner than is now done, while no one advantage arising from the exercise of that power shall be damaged or endangered by it. We have in this way something to gain, and, if we proceed with caution, nothing to lose. And in this case it is necessary to proceed with caution, for while we feel all these inducements to go into a revisal of the Constitution, we must feel for the Constitution itself and make that revisal a moderate one. I should be unwilling to see a door open for a reconsideration of the whole structure of the government, for a reconsideration of the principles and the substance of the powers given, because I doubt if such a door were open, we should be very likely to stop at that point which would be safe to the government itself. So again, this speaks to the mindset that our founding fathers had at the inception of this nation, some 230 plus years ago, in which they did not wish to see the government completely amalgamous, meaning having carte blanche to do whatever the hell it wants to, but at the same time, the structure that was there being designed as it was with a balance of powers to secure the rights and liberties of the people. It had to be a very thought-out process, in other words, to bring about change. And you know that that's what the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists despise. They want to be able to discard the Constitution. They're frustrated by the fact that the Constitution continues to stand in their way, and it does so by its very design. In fact, that is what the intent of James Madison, the father of the Constitution, was when he was delivering this address before the House of Representatives back in 1789. He goes on to say that I do wish to see a door open to consider so far as to incorporate these provisions for the security of rights, against which I believe no serious objection has been made by any class of our constituents, such as would be likely to meet with the concurrence of 2/3 of both houses and the approbation of 3/4 of the state legislature. So there you see the true tenets of federalism. That's what they were working towards. That's Article 5, and it is also part of the preamble to the Bill of Rights. Because again, as you recall, and if you go back and listen to some of our previous episodes here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, you'll see that we did a special on the preamble to the Bill of Rights itself. It speaks to the actual structure. The nationalists want to go past that. They want to destroy that. And it's important that we point to this, which is not taught much anymore, because it speaks directly to what the objectives of these United States of America are and have been since its inception. He said, I will not propose a single alteration which I do not wish to see take place, as intrinsically proper in itself, or proper because it is wished for by a respectable number of my fellow citizens, and therefore I shall not propose a single alteration, but is likely to meet the concurrence required by the Constitution. There have been no objections of various kinds made against the Constitution. Some were leveled against its structure because the President was without a council, because the Senate, which is a legislative body, had judicial powers in trials or impeachments, and because the powers of that body were compounded in other respects in a manner that did not correspond with a particular theory. Now I'm going to stop there because this directly contradicts all these claims that the three separate branches of government are truly equal. They're not. That's what the fears were at the time by some of the anti-federalists, and indeed even some of the federalists. But he goes on. He says, because it grants more power than is supposed to be necessary for every good purpose and controls the ordinary powers of the state governments. I know some respectable characters who opposed this government on these grounds, but I believe that the great mass of the people who opposed it disliked it because it did not contain effectual provisions against encroachments on particular rights and those safeguards which they have been long accustomed to have interposed between them and the magistrate who exercises the sovereign power. Nor ought we to consider them safe while a great number of our fellow citizens think these securities necessary. So again, they were fully cognizant of the fact that government in and of itself is nothing short of a necessary evil. It is certainly not something that should be turned to as some sort of an end-all be-all solution for the plethora and cornucopia of problems that we face both as a nation and people, and that is exactly what James Madison was getting at here. He goes on, he says that it has been said that it is unnecessary to load the Constitution with this provision because it was not found effectual in the Constitution of the particular states. It is true. There are a few particular states in which some of the most valuable articles have not at one time or another been violated, but it does not follow that they may have, to a certain degree, a salutary effect against the abuse of power. If they are incorporated into the Constitution, independent tribunals of justice will consider themselves in a peculiar manner the guardians of those rights. They will be an impenetrable bulwark against every assumption of power in the legislative or executive. They will be naturally led to resist every encroachment upon rights expressly stipulated for in the Constitution by the Declaration of Rights. Besides this security, there is a great probity that such a declaration in the federal system would be enforced because the state legislatures will jealously and closely watch the operations of this government and be able to resist with more effect every assumption of power than any other power on earth can do. And the great opponents to a federal government admit the state legislatures to be sure guardians of the people's liberty. I conclude from this view of the subject that it will be proper in itself and highly politic for the tranquility of the public mind and the stability of the government that we should offer something in the form I have proposed to be incorporated in the system of government as a declaration of rights of the people. So right there, he shows that the United States is not just a nation, it is a republic. But it's not just a republic, it has the interests of the people at heart through a direct electoral process. That the rights and interests of the people must be a paramount concern of the Constitution, and that when it is necessary and proper, the Constitution, through the proper annals, can be amended. You see, all of this speaks to how our government is supposed to operate. But we've gotten away from that. For generation after successive generation now, the upper echelons of the federal government have been usurping their power. They have been violative of the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. And there has been an attempt to reinterpret the Constitution, which, as we have so oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program, is impermissible by the very language of the Ninth Amendment itself. So, again, The national identity of the United States will be found in the Constitution, and that the Constitution itself speaks to what we are. And then again, there's another speech by James Madison, in which he states that we are not just a nation. Madison said, on examining the first relation, meaning of the governments and changes of authority, it appears on one hand that the Constitution is to be founded on the assent and ratification of the people of America, given by deputies elected for the special purpose, but on the other, that this assent and ratification is to be given by the people, not as individuals composing one entire nation, but as composing the distinct and independent states to which they respectively belong. It is to be the assent and ratification of the several states, derived from the supreme authority in each state, the authority of the people themselves. The act, therefore, establishing the Constitution will not be a national, but a federal act. That it will be a federal and not a national act, as these terms are understood by the objectors, the act of the people as forming so many independent states, not as forming one aggregate nation, is obvious from this single consideration that it is the result neither from the decision of a majority of the people of the Union, nor from that of a majority of the states. It must result from the unanimous assent of the several states that are parties to it, differing no otherwise from their ordinary assent than in its being expressed not by the legislative authority, but by that of the people themselves. So again, we see from that language that there is no nationalism that can apply. There's federalism, and only to a limited extent. But again, this is what is ignored. This is what the alt-right and the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and all of these contentious fringe elements don't want us to understand, don't want this to be a part of who we are, both as a nation and people. You see, the nation is the people, and the people are the nation. Therefore, there is no one tribal definition for nationalism. Nationalism has to come from the unanimous assent of the several states acquiescing to the delegated power and authority of the true fountain of sovereignty, which is we the people. That is why we, the people, are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in these United States of America. And that's the reason why I use the plural of these United States of America. Because, again, it is an amalgamation, an agreement, a union of the states to agree to this central government. And that the terms and conditions governing this union are found within the Constitution itself. Thus, the Constitution is a great social contract or compact. In fact, it is the greatest social compact ever devised by the hands of men, yet divinely inspired by providence above, to have ever come into existence throughout the course of human events. That, again, speaks volumes as to why it is dangerous to see that Bannon is out there again, saber-rattling, saying that he's going to push for economic nationalism, which, again, when you look at the intent of the Founding Fathers and the manner in which the Constitution itself is composed, You would see that they do not believe in economic nationalism. They do not even believe in nationalism because, again, I will state that the Constitution or the act establishing the Constitution will not be a national but a federal act. And even then, it always comes to being an act of the people themselves. And it's amazing. It is amazing how they parse this out. And you see, there's another attribute of this, where nationalism would push for a national government as opposed to a federal government. Madison goes on in this same speech to say that the difference between a federal and national government as it relates to the operation of government is supposed to consist in this, that in the former the powers operate on the political bodies composing the Confederacy in their political capacities, in the latter on the individual citizens composing the nation in their individual capacities. On trying the Constitution by this criterion, it falls under the national, not the federal, character, though perhaps not so completely as has been understood. In several cases, and particularly in the trial of controversies to which states may be parties, they must be viewed and proceeded against in their collective and political capacities only. So far, the national countenance of the government on the side seems to be disfigured by a few federal features. But this blemish is perhaps unavoidable in any plan. And the operation of the government on the people in their individual capacities in its ordinary and most essential proceedings may, on the whole, designate it in this relation a national government. But if the government be national with regard to the operation of its powers, it changes its aspect again. Then we contemplate it in relation to the extent of its power. The idea of a national government involves in it not only an authority over the individual citizens, but an indefinite supremacy over all persons and things so far as they are objects of lawful government among a people consolidated into one nation. This supremacy is completely vested in the national legislature. Among communities united for particular purposes, it is vested partly in the general and partly in the municipal legislatures. In the former case, all local authorities are subordinate to the supreme and may be controlled, directed, or abolished by it at pleasure. In the latter, the local or municipal authorities form distinct and independent portions of the supremacy, no more subject within their respective spheres to the general authority than the general authority is subject to them within its own sphere. In relation, then, the proposed government cannot be deemed a national one, since its jurisdiction extends to certain enumerated objects only, and leaves to the several states a residuary and inviolable sovereignty over all other objects. There you see. The nationalists would have it to where the federal government could act and operate and control over all. But that is certainly not the way that Madison viewed it, nor the way that the founding fathers, who were the framers of the Constitution, viewed it either. Basically, what this all comes down to is that we must oppose nationalism. We must be a composition. Because when you look at the nation-state and at the central government, you will see that it does not operate solely as a national government, nor do we want it to operate as a national government, because in so doing, it violates the natural law tenets that form the bedrock foundation of the Constitution and of our Federalist government. So you see, it's difficult to truly define what the United States is other than to call it a composition, a mixing and melding of the best attributes of the different kinds of governments to which Madison was speaking to in that address. And so, when we focus on it in those terms, and when we fully realize what it is that the Constitution stands for and represents, we then truly begin to understand the danger that is posed by any form of nationalist movement. Because, again, it is diametrically opposed to the intent that went into the law of the land, and the way that the Constitution is structured is to prevent that. So, tribalist notions of identity politics, all of these attempts to pit American citizen against American citizen are in direct violation of the letter and intent of the supreme law of the land. And so all of this also speaks to why it is important to foster this fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, because it truly speaks to how we operate as people and collectively as nation. You see, this is why it is said that the United States is a nation of laws and not of men, because laws are the physical, or rather the legal embodiment of the will of the body politique, or the true popular sovereigns, we the people. That was what was so revolutionary about the formation of America. In fact, that is the true epitome and embodiment of what American exceptionalism is all about. When people sit there and try and belittle that term, and to say that that's a mean, spiteful, hateful term, that we're thumbing our noses at the other national bodies of the world, it's not. The reason it's not is it is exceptional. It was revolutionary. Nothing like that had ever been attempted before, and it is pretty darn well successful, particularly when you consider that our Constitution is the longest standing document of its type throughout the entire course of human events. Meaning in world history, in all of world history, no other nation has been as stable, secure, or as free as that of the United States. But it's not just a nation, and that is the reason why it has managed to survive uninterrupted as long as it has. It's because it goes to that central element and that central understanding that we are a free nation, that we are a nation of laws, and that the national power is expressly limited via the federal apparatus, and that the true fountain of power, the true source of all governing authority and power within these United States of America, rests squarely with the American people. The terms and conditions that govern it are found in the Constitution, and that is why Article 6, Clause 2, the Supremacy Clause, states in no uncertain terms that the Constitution itself represents the supreme law of the land. This is not a very difficult concept, but those nefarious forces that are hell-bent on the complete and utter annihilation of these United States of America, both as a nation and people, don't want us to realize just how beautiful this is, or the great extent of power that we possess in our capacity as United States citizens. This is because they have their own ulterior motives. They have their own agenda, which operates in direct opposition to these well-established principles that were put into the Constitution at the time of its ratification. And indeed, that characteristic of it came even before the further addition of the Bill of Rights or the first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution. But the goal was always to protect the rights of the sovereign people against encroachments, against abridgments and incursions by a rogue and tyrannical central government. And again, it speaks volumes as to what these forces who are identifying themselves as nationalists are trying to achieve. It's why they don't like the foundational documents of these United States of America, because they fully realize that their goal is to topple that. It is to get rid of the balance that exists between the conglomeration of the several states and the central government. They want it to be controlled from the national perch, to impact the people and the power. I think one of the important things, therefore, to keep in mind with all of this is that it doesn't really matter what Stephen Bannon says or what the alt-right says. These labels are ultimately meaningless when we actually get down into what matters in the nation. That is what James Madison was attempting to point out in those two separate addresses. And again, it goes to the same central warning that the father of our nation, George Washington, gave in his 1796 farewell address as well. That when we allow ourselves to break down into disparate and competing factions, we lose sight of the importance of the fact that we, in our capacity as the citizenry of these United States of America, are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. We can't escape that. It is the quintessential aspect of who we are, both as a nation and people. And the sooner that we realize this, and the more time we take to focus upon it and realize just how important it is, the better able we shall be to overcome all of the hurdles, obstacles, adversities, challenges, or what have you that we are currently facing. That is what we have to get back to. There is no alternate recourse available to us as popular sovereigns. That is why, now more than ever, it is absolutely imperative that we all foster a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back with one last round of alcohol. Folks, she's not proposing a national alcohol, and if she does, push her out of the plane. As always, folks, I'm Randy Wright, and I've been your captain. I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Should you have any questions, comments, concerns, or even topic suggestions, please feel free to leave them either in the comment section here on our YouTube page, or on our Google Plus page, or even on our Facebook page. And on top of this, I invite you to follow us over there on Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. One more time, ladies and gentlemen, that's @RadioAviationEX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account as well as the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Graventon. You will find a link to the Blogspot account that is just chock full of useful information. And just as you will find in the description section of today's Solo Flight Special Edition of our state-of-the-art radio program, you will find a link to the Cafe Press account. Folks, at the Cafe Press account, we have all sorts of novelty items, trinkets, and goodies, from hats, shirts, shoes, apparels, laptop sleeves and protectors, smartphone sleeves and protectors, doggy apparel, shot glasses, drinking glasses, mugs, thermoses, you name it, either with our original Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer logo, or our first-class passenger logo, or even the two uplifting America logos. With such a wide array of products and all at reasonable prices, you simply cannot go wrong with the Cafe Press account. Oh, and by the way, if you have not already done so, please feel free to subscribe. All subscribers are welcome here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. The more the merrier, as the old adage goes. Once again, folks,